what are PIDs? These are persistent identifiers. And the idea is that you can use a PID when you're relating to a thing, whatever that is, some kind of digital object for all time. For the consumer, for the user, for the scientists, it's a very handy tool to print just the identifier, which should not change over time. Common examples are the DOI, that is very often used for papers or for dataset, ORCID, which is a specific PID that references researchers and contributors and makes them uniquely identifiable. Some are specific for research organizations, for instance. Maybe you've seen this raw ID. And now how does it work? We start with the digital object of kind. So this could be a digital object. This is from our institutional repository, a data publication. It has some metadata, like here in the description field, where it says what it relates to. There are other metadata, like who was the author, some relations to an article, for instance, and to what faculty it belonged. And then there are the actual data that are described by these metadata. Here's a README file that explains how it should be consumed, and then the actual data, and also a code book that explains what columns, for instance, means in tabular data, and also some analysis script. If you want to reference this object, you could, for instance, just print an URL on your publication or on your slide. That does work, but has a drawback when names change. There could be versions of it. There could also be that the whole platform changes, that it gets a new domain name, for instance, and that refers to something that is usually known as link rot, where over time resources will not be accessible anymore. And even if they are still accessible under another name, how could you be sure that it still represents the same thing? Our institutional repository was relaunched, and what now is OpenUMR was previously data UMR, and old links would not be functional anymore if we hadn't made a redirect. But the standard case might also be that it just breaks, it doesn't work, and therefore PIDs are quite handy. How does it work for a DOI? You would, for instance, start by describing an object and submit data in a repository. And then the repository handles all that in the background. The repository then issues metadata to a certain agency that is linked with the specific type of DOI. For instance, it could be DataCite or Crossref. What they do is collect metadata on all submissions that were made at some point and have a really vast database. That is a good thing because this is also indexed by crawlers, by search engines. And so your publications will be highly accessible. But also these metadata can be queried or downloaded with citation managers. That is a nice way to consume this meta information on your dataset, on your software, whatever you published. The primary use case is that they link to the original resource. There's a translation layer, so to speak, that when you have a DOI number, you have the agency as a resolver. And if you then have the HTTPS DOI org and then the number, this will resolve to a link that can be updated by the repository. So it should ideally be available for a very long time. What to publish and where? There are usually three general alternatives. There are subject-specific repositories, and we generally recommend using such repositories because they're targeted. This targets your relevant research community. If you're not sure what might be a relevant repository for your field, you can easily go to Re3Data and click around there and search for categories of repositories and filter for your use case, for the requirements you have. If you have large data, or if you have sensitive data, that is exclude many of the repositories, and you can find something there. If this is not an option for you, you could also go to institutional repositories. Many universities have their data repositories or publication repositories where you can publish data, which has usually the advantage that you can publish large amount of data, often without paying extra money. And you also have usually a high degree of service connected with these repositories. There will be a person in the position of a data curator who checks your files, who checks maybe your scripts, downloads it, tries to execute it, and sees if something breaks or if something is not quite logical to reproduce. This sets a very good quality standard. Then if you have some repositories at your institution that have that level of service. But that requires a bit of planning in advance. So you could also go to general purpose repositories like WiNoDa is very popular, or Figshare is quite popular, and upload your data there and have just minimal requirements on what metadata are related to your data, which comes with the downside that the data is not that well described and might be not that well reusable in the end. Speaking more about software, because people were usually focusing very much on research articles in the first place. Now people become more aware of their data to be also published. But in another step, it would be very nice to get research software also as a first-class citizen in terms of publication. And there's still some way to go, because there are some repositories that provide with PIDs, but usually software or research code is only published as a byproduct of data sets and has not the quality standards which you would expect from really packaged software with testing and everything. But still there are software journals that allow exactly that. But usually the forges, which are very popular, like GitLab could be considered a forge in this sense, or GitHub would be a forge. They usually don't provide you with persistent identifiers for your software. There is an integration for GitHub to WiNoDa, I think, that you can use for certain version tags, but it feels like a workaround, and there's maybe a bit of a way to go in this field. There are many considerations on what to publish where, like what charges repository take, what data formats do you have, are you using specific viewers, like a IIIF viewer for pyramid images, are there data protection things to be aware of, retention period, and as this is a bit complicated, it would be a good idea to consult with your local RDM professionals to plan a bit in advance that you have enough time for and resources for publication. With this, I would like to skip to a demo of our institutional repository, just to get a brief idea or feeling how it is to publish research data, to get a feeling how one repository could look like. Typically, you will find different data types and view different faculties and the data within. Here you will find all of publications and or data related to publications. If you want now to publish yourself, you would have to authenticate, or you go to your personal workspace and create a new research data set, for instance. Choose a collection of your choice, and then you will go to a submission workflow that allows you to enter lots of metadata. Not everything is mandatory, like a title would be mandatory, but you can add various authors. These are linked entities that you can use existing person objects, or you can also import this from ORCID, which has the consequence that the person's ORCID profiles are updated with your new publication. Then you would enter all these kind of metadata, like which faculty you're from. Very handy thing is to set relations. With this, people can browse from one publication to another, and you can represent the relations to an upper level data set or to the original publication that is supported by this data publication, for instance. There's space for personal version information, the support statements, and that is also important, you are asked to choose a license for people that want to consume the data. Suggestion would be to use a Creative Commons license, and here's a license chooser that guides you through the choice of available licenses. If commercial use is okay, or if you want to allow modifications, then you can grant the corresponding license for your work. You then need to upload some files here and can set specific visibility levels for your files. For instance, if it should be openly accessible, which should be appropriate in most cases if you plan to publish, but there could also be situations when you want just to have restricted access or archiving purposes. There is the obligatory usage agreement. You would get an identifier already at that point, which will be registered as a DOI, and you can print it on your article if you're in the stage of publication. What happens if you click deposit is that your submission enters into a curation workflow where someone will be informed and checks your data, checks your metadata, makes suggestions on how to improve understandability and if everything appears somehow logic. You can also add versions of a data set or of a software or whatever type you publish. And this undergoes the same curation process again, and then it is logically connected to the first version of your object you wanted to publish. With this, I would like to wrap up our session. The basic message is don't use just links and go for these DOIs because they separate the link from the long-term accessible identifier. For the choice of repositories, you should use the targeted approach if you can. Use subject-specific repositories if available. If you don't have specific requirements, you can use general purpose repositories. But if you have special requirements or want to benefit from institutional services, there should be institutional repositories as well for your publications of data or whatever you have to publish. One general note to end with, plan your data management early and also consult with RDM professionals because they have an overview and can estimate the workload that will be in final phases of your project so you don't run into trouble at later stages.